Andrew, you're notably ex-Bloomberg and most importantly, ex-Finimize. Tell me what you thought when you first came across Finimize.
So this must have been 2017.
Yeah.
I was going through this startup accelerator program, noodling on the concept of financial media and like media startups.
Yeah.
And someone there said, "Oh, do you know Finimize? You should check it out. They're really awesome." So I subscribed to a newsletter. A few months later, our former colleague Max Rothery
Yes.
from the community team dropped me a line through LinkedIn saying, "Hey, Andrew, you're like one of our most keen readers. You seem to open every newsletter," which was a bit creepy. But then he was like, "Well, you know, if you're ever around in Clerkenwell, pop into the office. We always like to meet people."
Yeah.
And then I actually did come in like the next week and met him, and I was chatting. And after a bit, he was like, "Do you want to come work here?"
Yeah.
A bit random.
Sounds about right.
So yeah.
And your role was entrepreneur in residence, which
Yes.
doesn't really mean anything, but means lots all at the same time. So what did you actually do?
What did I do? I guess it was really like thinking about the new stuff and like what's next. So I had a bit of a cycle every quarter. I'd sit down with Maxi, the founder CEO, our boss, and he would say like, "Okay, well, we've got all this stuff here. That's going great, but what could we possibly do next? And like, here's a few options."
Yeah.
And I guess it was my role as someone who's a bit of a jack of all trades to say like, okay, well, maybe we should think about community engagement. Like, how do we get our readers to be more engaged? And like, maybe there's some way that we could get them to talk to each other. Or maybe it's like people keep asking for an audio product. What does like a V1 of an audio product within Finimize look like? And then I would go away and kind of as much as possible on my own for like as little money as possible, do like an MVP, a minimal viable product for like what this looks like to then kind of put in front of the Finimize audience and actually stress test.
Yeah.
So it's this thing where people will ask for something, you go build it and you put it in front of them and they don't use it. So that's like a good signal that like maybe they didn't actually want it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my role of like this initial, okay, how can Finimize experiment with new stuff, iterate without spending too much money, without like sending, 3 software engineers and spending 6 months building something.
Absolutely. So we're going to come into some of the things that you did build. Maybe before we get into that, I've been on my soapbox for a long time about having someone dedicated to focus on building out new things, whether it's community, content, and avoiding the whirlwind. What's one piece of advice that you'd share in terms of how to do that effectively?
That is the key challenge, I think, always. I think at Finimize it helped that my role was quite defined as like the entrepreneur in residence, the guy who has the mandate to focus on the new.
Yeah.
There was always this tension of being pulled into the day-to-day, and you would ask me to help out, and I would be very happy to help out. But I think I would say to any company, if you can say to one person, like, you have this mandate, you focus on the new, it gives them a green light to say no to other people and like put a bit of block on that whirlwind. If you can't appoint one person, if you as that person want to have time to focus on the new, block out every Friday, if it's possible, or a certain part of your week, maybe it's just a Thursday morning or whatever it is, and then just like block it out on your calendar and don't take any meetings and just have time to think.
Okay, let's dive into the products you built. Audio, right? So when you heard about Finimize, it was a daily newsletter, but we became an audio first company. What do you remember of that time? What do you remember of your process, your thinking? Walk us through it.
Audio was one of the things that people kept asking for. I was always quite skeptical myself. Finimize is you're kind of learning something, and personally I learn much better from reading than I do from listening. Like, I love listening to podcasts, but I would never listen to anything too intense. It's more just like background chill while I'm like doing some chores or at the gym or something. So I was a bit skeptical that people really wanted this.
Right.
They kept asking for it, but then it was a case of, okay, we could go build a studio like this, we could bring on a whole team, we could do all of these things, but that's quite a commitment. So what does like a V1 look like? And I would never consider myself like a full-on audio producer, but I can turn my hands to different things. So I just did a first attempt. I seem to remember one of our earliest ones was you and me in the basement of the Finimize office, literally in a cupboard.
In a broom cupboard.
Trying to get as many soft things as possible, like piled up.
Coats over our heads as sound blockers.
It was pretty budget. It wasn't this beautiful padded studio with nice mics. It was like a real budget operation.
We were the original podcast bros before it became a thing.
But to be honest, it sounded okay.
Yeah.
And it was certainly good enough. You know, it's this 80-20 rule. I think it was 80% of the way there. Mm-hmm. And it was good enough to like put some version out there in front of people. The other thing is, you know, the ideal experience from a user's point of view is this is some function in the app, and, you know, you open up the app and it's got a kind of listen to me button, but that's engineering work. So the first version was like, let's just host this on SoundCloud and like send it out as a link in the newsletter and like actually see how many people are going to click on this. Yeah. And, you know, that's a good signal of like, is it worth putting that engineering resource in and then, you know, moving from the broom cupboard into some kind of proper studio.
Exactly. And 7 years later, here we are. The Daily Brief is a flagship product. People, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of people listen to it every day. So congratulations. The other thing that I remember you spending an awful lot of time on was what we then called packs, what we now called guides, just that educational journey through a given topic. Again, how did you think about it, given everyone and their dog thinks they can do education. Everyone wants to do education. But how did you crack it?
So I guess, again, going back to the original Finimize product, it's this newsletter, it's 2 stories a day. And I suppose the kind of financial education part of it was delivered through osmosis. It's like you engage with this newsletter every day. We will sprinkle in some nuggets about how the economy works, how finance works, and hopefully over the months you like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get this.
Yep.
And the packs was a more deliberate, like, okay, no, this is like the bit where you are educating yourself, you are learning. They were tricky to write because you don't want it to be like homework. You know, like there's always a danger that these things become really boring. So we tried to keep it light. There's equally when you're trying to keep things light, there's always this danger that you get dismissed as like lightweight and you don't know what you're doing. So it's tonally, it's a very tricky line to walk, and I hope we walked it. Interestingly, on the packs, that led into an experiment that we did that, you know, didn't really work, and we didn't kind of make into part of the Finimize offering, which was around video. Yeah. So, you know, we'd done these experiments with audio with some of the initial kind of introduction to investing packs. I remember we like outsourced to some agency to like, okay, what does this look like as like a cool animated video? And we put that in front of our user base, and they were a bit like, okay, cool, like fine. Yeah. But they obviously weren't getting that much from it, and it was relatively expensive to make. So we, you know, quietly strangled that project and moved on.
So people watching and listening will be familiar with the Modern Investor Pulse, which is the preeminent source of intelligence around how modern retail investors are thinking, feeling, and behaving. It started off as something that you tested and trialed, and maybe could you take us back to when you began it and what you were thinking, perhaps what your understanding was of modern retail investors when you started it and how it evolved?
Yeah, I love seeing that come out from Finimize. Is every quarter?
Every quarter.
Yeah. It gives me a little glow of like, that's my baby. Yeah. It's all grown up. Yeah, one of the things I look back fondest on for Finimize, to be honest, it was really stealing an idea. I mean, there's the Bank of America Merrill Lynch survey of professional investors that goes out, I think it's every month. And I thought, as far as I'm aware, no one does this for the retail audience. And wouldn't that be fascinating to start that data set? So, you know, once a month seemed quite heavy, but we thought once a quarter would be more appropriate. And we just started doing it. And the first couple of months, I think there was a bit of a bemused reaction around, because it's like, well, why are you doing this? And once you've only got, you know, the first month is like, well, what can you tell? Yeah. But then once you've got 4-5 quarters of data under your belt, you start to realize like, oh, hang on, there's a trend here, and this is really interesting. So I don't know, people were really bullish on the markets a year ago, and as we're kind of coming into the pandemic, for example, you can be like, okay, the sentiment is really shifting here, and we've got like the data to prove it, and we're not just kind of like feeling it. So yeah, it's one of the things I'm most proud of actually from the Finimize days.
The Pulse, a fantastic well of data on modern retail investors, and Finimize has been around for 10 years and has a ton of data. In my view, at least, there's still so much that financial services doesn't understand and gets wrong about retail investors. I wonder if, in your experience, post-Finimize, that's the sense you get from some of the organizations you've worked with, and if you've got any insight or hypotheses about why that might be.
Yeah, I mean, there's still definitely a massive misunderstanding of the retail audience. I kind of split them into two. There's like a mass of people who don't invest. I mean, people in the UK and Europe really don't invest, and there's that kind of retail investor audience who are almost like not even retail investors but should be.
Yes.
And there's a lot to be done about taking them by the hand and saying, look, this is not that bad. There's a lot of things you can do that if you take steps now, 30 years from now, your future self will really thank you, and you'll have a lot more in your pension, you have a lot more in your savings than you might if you just stick in cash. And then there's this other audience that's super sophisticated and like want to do all sorts of stuff, and they're like trading options, and there's like a market there for people who just like, okay, they get the basics and they just want to like run with it. So there's these two worlds, and they don't overlap very much, or maybe some people have come from this first world into the second world, but I'm not sure either are particularly well catered for with the current offering.
Agreed. Where I see people go wrong a lot is I don't think they separate the worlds. I think they treat everyone like that first world of kid gloves, baby steps, you must be protected, and that's all well and good, except if you've got any sophistication whatsoever, in which case you're just completely on your own. And for the most part, that kid glove approach hasn't worked, and so there needs to be something more. There needs to be something new.
I was in my local bank opening bank accounts for my daughters a few months ago, and there was a get into investing leaflet on the wall, and as I was waiting for the admin to happen, I was like, I'll pick that up and have a look through. And looking at that was basically investing is the most terrifying thing ever. All these risk warnings, you could probably lose all your money. And it's this, I presume that was there because regulators made them put it there. That's not their marketing. But I was like, no one coming in fresh being like, oh, what's investing, picking this up. Exactly. With thing oh, I should put money in. There was no by the way, if you leave money in cash for 30 years, you'll have this amount. But if you put it in the market on average returns, you'll have a lot more. That was never kind of really spelled out.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And if it's a high street retail bank, I suspect the $7.99 per trade is probably an off-putting factor too.
There's that too,
Yeah. So there's been a ton of debate, and it's ongoing, around paywalls in media, financial media, general media. Where do you sit on that spectrum? Are you in favor of or against?
I'm in favor of media having a paywall, and I'm in favor of people paying for media. Okay, pay for media. It's pretty sad if you look at the stats about how few people in the UK are willing to pay, though. There's the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. They put out a report every year. The most recent one I've seen says 10% of people in the UK pay for any media at all. I mean, not talking about Netflix and stuff like that, but kind of news-adjacent media, Times, Telegraph, etc. I think the UK is a bit of a specific market because we have the BBC. We all pay for that through the license fee in some way. But, that skews things as quality. If you just want hard news, of what's going on in the country, that is there, and it's free at the point of consumption. So that skews things a bit. Looking at that 10% positively, it's a number that's growing. It was single digits for many years, and it's starting to creep up. More and more publications are introducing paywalls. So, on some level, you have to pay if you want something. Yeah. I think the people who are doing it well have their niche. The ones who are doing really well are, business, finance publications, Bloomberg, Financial Times, Economist, so on, Finimize.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky one, I think, in general news, that market is so commodified. There's a lot of influencers out there who will just like, you know, read the news on the BBC and then read it out in a quirky voice in front of Big Ben or whatever, and like get 1 million followers. You know, that's the kind of media world we're living in as well. But you know, the people who are doing it well have a focus, they stick to it. There's a real reason why someone wants to pay for this, and the ones who do it really well, like, build on that and have a community and like sense of belonging that's more than just like, we publish articles, you read them.
And I guess they're also becoming channel agnostic, thinking about The Economist on Substack, for example, and you know, the FT doing podcasts and so on.
Yeah.
What do you remember of the Finimize paywall experiment and launching in 2019?
So yeah, Finimize originally was a free product. I mean, there's a few learnings from, you know, having a free product with an audience. It was, you know, roughly a million people on the newsletter at the time back then, and thinking, well, if we just launch a paid product, like maybe 10% of them will start paying us, right? And in reality, it's like far less than 1% will flip from a free product that they're enjoying to a paid product. So that was one learning for me. People who come to a free product don't necessarily want to come to paid. But when we launched the paywall, we actually brought a whole different audience in.
Yeah,
like we were marketing that online, and it was interesting to me. There were these two very separate groups of people who came in, one who loved the free product and one who loved the paid product. So that was one massive learning for me. And then we kind of almost got the tailwind from people who'd come in tempted by a paid product and weren't quite willing to pay us, and we kind of pushed them onto the free product and like built the numbers that way, rather than what we'd originally imagined, which was like bring people into the free and then upsell them to paid. So that was one huge learning.
Exactly. That was quite a cool sort of flywheel, right? We had people on paid. If they didn't take out a paid product, they'd go into the free product, and that was ad supported, and so you'd monetize that way. On the free product, hopefully over time you'd convince more and more people to move into paid, and you'd probably have a better shot with people who came in via that paid route in the first place, and you can hopefully again monetize them in the app. I remember how we sort of even got to that paywall, which was, you know, we had the newsletter and that was working really well. People asked us for more content. They wanted the educational content they wanted. They wanted to know what our analysts were thinking, and we thought the best way to deliver that was with an app. So we did that, but it was free. And it was free until, I think, if I remember correctly, there was a product market fit metric that we wanted to get to 40% on. And when we did consistently with content tweaks, with product tweaks, we said, right, we've got a good app here. Now let's switch on a paywall. And we experimented with price. We tried to optimize there versus our marketing spend and so on. But then we started to see, okay, people are willing to pay for this. And like you said, a slightly different audience to what we expected and a different mechanic, but it started to work. Fast forward to today, that paid product is vastly different to what it was, but people are still getting tremendous value from it. Do you worry about AI taking your job, journalist jobs in general?
I don't. Maybe I'm overly optimistic. I'm naturally optimistic kind of person.
Yeah.
Not because I don't think AI is impressive. I think AI does incredibly impressive things. It feels like the future, or certainly the next few years, is humans who are willing to use AI and like subcontract jobs to AI or tasks in their day, producing really great content rather than just like AI producing stuff. If you kind of go to even the premium versions of Claude or ChatGPT or whatever and say like, give me an amazing newsletter about the things that happen in finance over the past 24 hours, like, it does an okay job, but it's not that interesting.
Yeah.
So there's still that taste. I mean, you know, it's become a cliche that taste is like what kind of distinguishes humans from AI, but there is something in that.
So you've worked at Bloomberg, a handful of tech media startups. I think you're the perfect person to answer this question. How do you craft a good story?
Gosh, that's the one. So I think a few things. I mean, Bloomberg taught me to always follow the data.
Okay.
So like anyone who wants to tell a story out there, anecdote is great, color is great, but if you can really point to a trend is something like the highest in 10 years or the lowest 10 years, or that these two things always follow each other and they have done for the past 10 years and now they're splitting apart. Like, something's happened there. That's interesting. So if you're thinking about kind of content more broadly beyond just like mainstream media and the news, if you're a business and you want to produce content, I would always encourage those businesses to look to their own data. Like, they probably have all sorts of interesting things internally. If you are willing to spend the time mining that, analyzing that, and you know, you're ballsy enough to put it out into the world, there's some really interesting stories to tell there in most businesses.
So I know you started an OnlyFans account. You say it's for part of the story. The jury's out, but maybe just share what was that all about?
So that one kind of came out of thinking about me and like who I am as a person. And like, if you're trying to tell a story, or at least if you're pitching to a magazine to tell a story, you have to be able to answer like, why should you tell this story? They all have their own staff writers. They're getting like dozens of pictures a day probably from people. So why should you tell this? I'm a middle-aged white man who lives in London. Like, people don't really want to hear about me. Like, there's a lot of middle-aged white men who live in London, like, trying to tell stories. And it's like, okay, well, what's the kind of thing that a middle-aged white man doesn't do that much? It's like, they don't usually start OnlyFans. So that was the kind of genesis of that story.
Certainly not as creators, anyway.
Yeah, they spend a lot of time on OnlyFans, but usually the other side of that transaction. Yes. So I was like, okay, I want to learn about this. And it can be fantastic to like learn by doing. I mean, Finimize told me that. Let's learn by doing. So it's like, I'm just going to start my own account and see what it's like. I learned some amazing things about OnlyFans as a business by doing it. And you suddenly start to realize why all these OnlyFans creators are like all over Instagram and TikTok and these other places, for one thing, because OnlyFans has no search function. So you can't like just start an OnlyFans. You have to promote your niche somewhere else and then point them back to your OnlyFans.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that.
We just do that now on OnlyFans.
I mean,
give you your best viewed video.
Should Finimize be on OnlyFans?
Yes, you should definitely be on OnlyFans. Big life hack.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, OnlyFans loves the fact that it's not all sex, because if some regulator ever comes and looks, they can say like, yeah, there is sex, but there's other stuff. So OnlyFans would welcome Finimize with open arms and say like, look, there's financial investing information here. Like, I mean, maybe you should start a conversation with them. They might give you some money to like set up a Finimize OnlyFans.
Like in the comments. Leave a comment if you want us to join OnlyFans and let you know what we see. So it sounds like companies should be telling stories, building stories, but they're not. What's your sense on why there's so much inertia?
I think a lot of businesses think they're boring. Like, they think they don't have a story to tell. I'm not sure that's true. I think if you look within your operation, there are always interesting stories to tell. I mentioned data earlier. A lot of the ways companies put themselves out in the world is intentionally boring. Like, they are terrified that someone might actually engage with something. Like, I think there's a lot of certainly big corporate companies with their social media teams and their communications teams, their marketing teams. It's like their worst nightmare that people might actually talk about them, which is really interesting. There's an upside to being talked about as well as a downside.
I do wonder whether there's also an element of people taking their own data for granted, because, and I think this is companies of all sizes, in that if I think about Finimize, I look at our data, the insides of the machine all day, every day. And so it's not that new or exciting in a given moment. And I think about it all day, every day. Everyone who's not me, bar the other people in the company, don't think about us at all, right? They'll think about us when they're reading the newsletter. They'll think about us when they're listening to the latest piece of research in the app. And then they go about their day. And so turning something that I take for granted, inside out and sharing it is probably more interesting to anyone than I would necessarily think. Maybe as a final question then, are there any opinions you have, relatively strongly held, that you think most people in the industry would disagree with?
I think my main one is that scoops matter. So I think within journalism, there's a lot of natural competitiveness, and people want to get that scoop. They want to talk to that source and get that bit of information out into the world before anyone else. Great. I think in reality, for the audience reading, like, they don't know who got the scoop.
Yeah.
Like, you meet people all the time who are like, oh, I saw this fantastic story in the BBC, and I'm like, well, I'm thinking, actually, that was a Guardian story, and the BBC just followed it up a few hours later. And they're like, I don't care. I read it on the BBC.
Yeah.
Like, they don't follow this like information back to its source and understand who got the scoop. So there's this tension there where all the journalists want to get the scoop. It makes their career. You know, the British Journalism Awards at the end of the year, there's the Scoop of the Year.
Okay.
But no one outside
really
of the industry really cares who got it.
Does it actually get people promoted?
Oh, definitely. I'd say, like, there's this thing, like, within the industry, that is how you make your career. Right. You know, you wanna get information. I guess it is the heart of the journalism role. Yeah. And I think if you asked the average person on the street, like, what's a journalist do? They would say, like, yeah, they get scoops, they get information. But when you look at how they actually interact with the media, they don't care about that. Yes. No one's like, I want to read the original take. They're just like, I want to read the one where I always go to, or the one that happened to just appear on my feed.
Got you. And I guess even if, as a consumer of media, fine, you got the scoop, but, you know, what have you done for me lately? I need today's news, not yesterday's scoop. Once it's scooped, it's gone.
Exactly. So. And it's one of the reasons why media is such a hard business, because you know, it does rely on extracting information that isn't known and putting it out into the world. Yeah. But the organization that does that isn't really rewarded financially. Like, it's so easy to take that and say, comma, the Guardian says, comma, the BBC says, and put your own story out perfectly legally in a way that, like, if you're Netflix, you can't just like take something from Disney Plus and put it on your thing and say Disney Plus says, and like monetize that. It's a real tension at the heart of the industry.
So should companies be looking for their own scoops?
I think it's definitely a way to cut through. I think if you can get something exclusive out there into the world, I mean, we did it with the Investor Pulse at Finimize. I think people should be thinking along those lines. There are stories within their organizations, there's data within their organizations that has a chance of cutting through much more than something that's commodified.
Andrew, it's been fantastic having you here. Thank you for joining me. Before I let you go, please share with our audience, where can they find you and your work?
A few years ago, I would have said Twitter or social media. Like, it's all a bit dead now, isn't it? I have a very Googleable name. Andrew Rummer. LinkedIn is kind of lame, but like that's to be honest where I'm most active nowadays. Or I have my own website, rummer.co.uk.
Thanks again, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.